The Planning Commission podcast is a spirited discussion with myself and a couple of my longtime colleagues in the profession. Our discussions are based solely on our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of our employers, the American Planning Association, or even our alma maters. So grab a seat in the back of City Hall, dig out an old copy of Robert's Rules, and for goodness sakes, read your packet. The Planning Commission is now in session.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Man, oh man, are we thrilled to have a guest with us today that is challenging the status quo, no doubt about it. And it's exactly the kind of a person that we want on our show to talk about stirring things up, because that's what we do. And so with that, commissioners, I want to ask you a question. As a practicing planner, how have you stirred things up in your profession? What are the ways that you've gotten yourself out there and maybe out over your skis or asked pointed questions in various ways? Just kind of get the stage started here. What do we think? Don, I know with your laugh, you've got a few things to pull from. What are ways that you've stirred the pot? Tell me about it.
I don't know that there's ways that I haven't stirred the pot. I mean, that's kind of just been my, like,
Just you.
So my mom said this when I was young, Don or Donnie is what I was, is you're a contrarian. And if somebody says something is white, you're going to say it's black. And even if you know damn well it's white, you're going to do everything in your power to prove that it's black. And for whatever reason, between that skill and others, and in reading the recent book from our guest today, Chuck Marohn, I mean, it's really embodies that. And I think it's made me better at doing it in terms of, whether it's hooking a GoPro up to a wheelchair and holding bid documents in front of it to show that they can't build a curb ramp properly, to basically, when I remember a couple of years ago at the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance conference, engineer with a consulting firm said, well, they have to do that to follow standards. And I said, which standards? And he said, AASHTO standards. And I said, the word shall never appears in the AASHTO Green Book. There are no AASHTO standards. And I just got this dumbfounded look
Policy
from them. So, I mean, that's just it. It's every day for me. So I can't single it out.
I'm going to reveal something to some people who didn't know this in terms of how have I stirred things up. I might have an alter ego, and that alter ego, whose name is Captain Crosswalk, I need to get old Captain out of hiding. It's been a minute. So a bunch of years ago,
you're Captain Crosswalk.
He is the Captain Crosswalk, but he's won an award. Well, somebody else has won an award for Captain Crosswalk.
I forgot about that. Oh
yes.
God!
They keep stealing your ideas.
So
Doritos, Captain Crosswalk.
Let me tell the quick story. So we had a bunch of folks, unfortunately, who were struck and either severely injured or killed trying to cross the street. And I just thought, this is so absurd, right? This is so utterly absurd. So what's the solution? Oh, throw orange flags out there and call it good. So I just thought, what's the most absurd response that I could have? So I went and found one of those bright orange unitard things you see at college football games, and made a captain hat with crosswalk guy across. And then I got the biggest, most obnoxious orange bed sheet that I could find and made the biggest flag. And it says, get off ye cell phone, or put ye cell phone down, and all this stuff. And I just started going into downtown in Boise and just walking around and helping people across the streets. Well, one day I went to the head of the DOT. I went right to the DOT ITD headquarters, and there's a crosswalk right there that they put in, by the way, to go to the fast food joint on the side of a state highway, or basically. And I'm like, I'm just going to cross there. Their photo people came out and started taking pictures. And they're like, who are you? And I told them, and they submitted it for an award and won. And they're like, they got a safety award for me silently sort of protesting crossing conditions. And I even had a song that I'm not going to sing today, but I'm like, give me a plaque or something, right? So anyway, Jess, hit it, because we got to get to our guest, man. He's a good one and he needs all the time.
I've got nothing like that.
You got nothing? That's okay.
Nothing like that, y'all. I'm pretty silent over here. The most
right.
outrageous thing I ever did was I suggested that we do community plans in areas that included transportation systems. And that's how I snuck in a transportation plan one time.
Your other revolutionary one, Jess, was just like search any comprehensive plan or a transportation plan for the word people.
Yeah, that's not
it. You'll be amazed how often it doesn't show up in that.
Yeah.
So
never.
Well, let me get to
let's
whiskey
transition.
pairing.
That's right. Go for it.
Yeah, so our whiskey pairing today, so we've got Chuck Marone, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, challenging the status quo. And I thought long and hard while standing at the liquor store for this one. And I'm going with a Buffalo Trace product called Ancient Age, because Chuck, I think, is trying to bring the transportation profession out of an ancient age. And on Ancient Age's logo, it says, carefully distilled along the banks of the Kentucky River, according to the finest old traditions. And I just think of so many cities with these stroads along their riverfront, where I think the engineers would go, carefully designed along the banks of the Kentucky River, according to the finest old standards. And so, but Ancient Age is not expensive, but it's really good. It's the same mash bill as Buffalo Trace. They don't do as much to it. I would take it any day and time as a base for a cocktail. So there you go.
Very good. Very good. Well, with that, I guess I should probably set us up, with what's the stage of this. And so what is our episode even called? I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say, thank you, traffic engineer. May I have another? I think it comes from a very popular movie, pop culture. So with that, we're going to introduce now our fabulous guest and author of his most recent book, which, oh God, I'm a fanboy, Chuck. I might need your autograph. Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Mr. Chuck Marohn. Chuck, thank you for joining the Planning Commission podcast.
Hey, well, I'm a fan now too. I didn't realize he was a superhero on this podcast. Here's Captain Crosswalk.
Chuck's holding up a phone with a picture of Captain Crosswalk.
Yes. And the flag says, put the phone down.
Put your cell phone down. Yes.
Yeah. So way to go. You are, I think I see Marvel movie in the future.
Yeah.
In your future.
Right. Yes. We're still looking for sponsors. And if that's the way we're going to take this, then let's rock. Chuck, tell us who you are. Tell the audience a bit about yourself, where you've come from on this wonderful journey that's brought you to our podcast today. We're all excited to have you. So go for it. Tell us about you.
That's great. Well, my name's Chuck. I'm from Brainerd, Minnesota, which is a small town a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm a civil engineer. I worked for a number of years doing the standard like city engineering kind of stuff, roads, streets, sewer, water systems, drainage, that kind of thing. I went back to school and got a master's degree in urban and regional planning. I kind of realized I wasn't a good engineer, right? I asked too many questions and didn't really fit in. And I thought, well, I could do this planning thing. I'm kind of a, big picture thinker. And I went back and got a planning degree. I started my own planning firm and did that for quite a long time, over a decade. Kind of started to recognize that I also wasn't a very good planner. I didn't really fit in there either. And in 2008, I started to write this blog. I started to write a blog trying to explain in the middle of the housing crisis why our cities were going broke and why we were experiencing the financial distress we were, and hint, it was not the reasons everyone was saying. As things tend to do sometimes in the internet age, the whole project blew up. I was writing for my fellow professionals, really trying to share some professional insights and say, is anybody else seeing what I'm seeing? And pretty soon I was getting invited to speak in different places and first it was dozens, then it was hundreds, then it was thousands, then it was, over 2 million people a year now are reading the site. And very interested in this project that we call Strong Towns. How do we make cities stronger, more prosperous, financially viable, better places to live?
So Chuck, when did you have this epiphany in the transportation realm to realize either A, I'm not a good engineer because I'm asking questions, or a story you share in the book is about a tree around a curve. And just the fear that if you decided to leave there, a drunk would plow into it, and therefore the engineer would lose the license. What was that epiphany moment for you?
People have asked me this before, and I disappoint, because I wish there was like a moment where the heavens opened up and the light shined down and the birds started to sing, and I can say like I saw the light, and I didn't. It was a long, painful process. I was a bad engineer because I asked a lot of questions, but I was a good engineer because I understood how to follow orthodoxy. Like that was taught to me, and I'm like, okay, I get it. But there were all these kind of warning spots along the way. And the one I describe in, I think it's chapter 4 of the book, 3 or 4, where I talk about this tree, that beautiful tree on the edge of the road, and it should have stayed. It was been there for 100 years and was not causing any problems to anybody. But the standard said, get rid of everything in the clear zone. Mm-hmm. And my little bit of kind of conscious saying, maybe we shouldn't do that, was quickly shot down by the more seasoned professionals saying, let me tell you, son, if we don't do that, here's the bad things that will happen to everybody. It was a series of those kind of incidents where common sense is dispatched with in a way that when you're inside the profession, you can kind of justify and analyze. But the further you step away from it, which is what planning school did for me, is got me out of the orthodoxy, the more insane it looks. And, as with any heretical undertaking, once you start to question it, it can unravel, the edifice that it's built on can unravel very quickly. And that's what you see in the book.
It's awesome. So Chuck, tell me, what does the public think they know about traffic engineering, but they don't really get it?
I think if I had to pin it down to one thing, I would say that there is an inherent trust that engineering is this long, thoughtful practice of things, that everything we see in the transportation realm in particular has been tested and refined and honed over this long, like very, very long, lengthy, thoughtful process. And the reality is it was just thrown together in a very short period of time after World War II, as we were starting to build the interstates and build highways across the continent. It was never tested. It was never honed. It was never, A/B tested. Is this good? Is that good? We just tried things and tried to solve the problem in front of us. And then that became the way things are done. Mm-hmm. And by the time you get to my early, career in the 1990s, it was the way things have always been done.
Right.
And none of this is, is beyond questioning.
Oh, I used to have so much trouble with that as an engineer. I'm also a recovering engineer. And that was a trouble that I had. They would say, well, this is the way we've always done it. I'm like, I think we made up those rules. Like, didn't people create those standards? I feel like we should talk about
cough,
that.
85th percentile, yes. cough, right?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Well, and I try to be generous in my interpretation, my understanding of why we do these things.
Right.
And I recognize that at the end of World War II, we were freaked out about the Great Depression. We did not want to go back into the Great Depression. And part of our strategy for staying out with that was building highways all over the place and creating lots and lots of economic growth. And so we turned to the engineering profession and we said, look, we need you to go do this stuff. We need you to do it really quickly. We need you to do it at scale, create the standards, create the approach. Here's billions of dollars, go do it. And they did. But I think that the myth that has grown up around that is that somehow the stuff that came out of that is infallible. It's some like set of deep insights that have now been, akin to Moses coming down from Mount Sinai and handing us stone tablets, that somehow this is beyond question. And the reality is it was just crap we threw together to try to, do something really quick at scale.
Yeah, in a world that was very different than it is today, too. I mean, it's just a lot of things that were assumed.
Well, you were in a mode where we were deconstructing cities to build suburbs. Mm-hmm. And that was where the exciting energy was. And financially, that has turned out to be a disaster for cities, for families, for our economy, for everything. And, I think we are in the cusp of, if not another Great Depression, certainly an economic shakeout and reckoning of kind of century defining proportions. And I think what will come out of that is a different economics around place. And so I'm trying to fill that void ahead of time, in a sense.
Yeah. So Chuck, first of all, the introduction, I mean, it was like a Jerry Maguire moment for me. I'm like, you had me at hello, right? Like I've heard this discussion in so many different public meetings. And, my favorite, we have one recently where there's an entity, I'll let you figure out who that might be, of proposing a major new bridge. And I'm going, oh yes, you can just see what's scenario one. Oh, the no build. What's that going to mean for you? Well, the gates of hell are going to open up. Every firstborn child will be sacrificed to the god of Ra, and you're going, yeah, we know where this is going, right? So my question for you is, I had a conversation just yesterday with somebody about your book, and the person said, I read it, but I certainly, if there's times when I think that there's politics coming into the book, I might set it aside. And I'm going, well, I think it's an indirect politic, but it's like, yeah, there's a lot of, at least not necessarily, red, blue, left, right, that sort of classic politics, but there's certainly a perspective. And so I'm wondering if you can touch on the general philosophies of the last 50, 60 years compared to strong towns and the philosophies of strong towns.
It's a good question. And it's not a question that I think I tackle directly head on in the book. There's a little bit of a section about how we fund transportation, and that gets into some of the politics of transportation. But for the most part, what you're looking at with the American transportation system and all of the land use stuff that comes out of that, so the frontage roads, the big box stores, the strip malls, the gas stations, the franchise restaurants, the next tier of suburban subdivisions, what comes out of that is the result of a top-down project. Now, you can have a top-down philosophy that is conservative, based around private sector and corporations and what have you. You can have a top-down philosophy that's based around government leading the way with infrastructure investments and supporting municipal debt and subsidizing houses and that type of thing. But either way, you have this merging of top-down philosophies around this idea that we can go in and essentially order the way cities should be. This stands in contrast to thousands of years of human history of bottom-up building of places, of a more organic type of growth and development, one that is more sensitive to not financial markets and federal policy, but more sensitive to humans and human needs and human desires at the block level. And so if strong towns is anything in a political sense, it is a recognition that top-down systems are very coarse, are very non-responsive, and are not scaled to humans. And the problems that we're having, the challenges that we face today, are all human scaled problems. They're not big system-wide things. It astounds me that we live in this age where we walked away from the mainframe computer, recognizing that smartphones was a much better way to share information across a broad system. And yet when we look at our governments, the way we make decisions, the way we fund things, everything has to start from a transportation standpoint with a centralized plan, with the funding and everything kind of flowing down from that. And it is the antithesis of the way humans actually live.
Well, what I found funny about Chris's story, and I will be quizzing him later to guess who that person was, because a statement like that about your book is also then going, well, then everything we do for traffic engineering and traffic modeling and deciding to widen roads and design roads is apolitical, right? There's no political fluence in that. I mean,
absurdity, right?
And I say that to ask this because you've had some blog posts and other things in recent years, and in your book, what I really like is at the end of each chapter where you kind of demystify this thing. You also have, okay, here's the strong towns approach to that. Here's how the paradigm gets adjusted. And one of my favorite things you brought about, and I've thought about it a ton, is that engineers shouldn't be project managers and project decision makers. And I love, you've got a table in there, who makes the decision? And you say technical professionals, pavement thickness and cross slopes and lane widths and bituminous mixture and things. And the non-professionals, the public, whomever, should be talking about design speed, design volume, design vehicle size. And the thing that gets me about that is, to me, I've always felt the engineer should be there to make the input technically correct on the backside. The engineer should be there not to say we must have a 12-foot lane width or a 5-foot bike lane, but hey, if you're recommending a 8-foot travel lane width and it's a truck route, maybe that's not the best. So walk us down that track a little bit more and tell us how you got to that philosophy that I know some of us have also come to.
Well, let me give you an analogy in the architecture realm. Because when we look at great buildings and we recognize that an architect was present in designing this, architects will sit down and they will look at things like, how do the humans pass through this space? How do they utilize it? What do we want the light to reflect off of? They're asking a whole different set of things about the experience of the people in that place and the way it's supposed to operate. And often the tension between architects and engineers is that the architect will design something, give it to the structural engineer, who will say, well, this defies the laws of gravity and physics. And so I've got to put a beam in here and change this. And there'll be, debate back and forth. When we get to the transportation realm, which let's recognize the way we do transportation today shapes the land use adjacent to it. It shapes everything about our built environment. It's as if we skip the architect and just give the building to the structural engineer and say, design this. And what you would get is a building that is just full of concrete and structural beams with no windows, no air circulation, no secondary concerns, but does it stand up? In the transportation realm, these things have such deep impact on our places. We hand them over to engineers who really have two base concerns. How quickly do we move traffic, and how much traffic can we move? The speed and the volume. They simplify that down to this idea of mobility. But when you simplify a street down to that, you're stripping everything about that street that creates value. You're stripping out the experience of the person. You're experiencing the houses along it, the businesses along it, how they interact with each other. There's an infinite number of things that get just reduced and not taken into account. So I think engineers are really important, but we should keep them doing the things that they're actually competent to do, which, design of human spaces is not one of them. Human psychology, human relations, public health. These are all things that engineers are not qualified to have any say in, but can support, in a sense, after the fact, larger public policy objectives when they get to the point of, what should the pavement thickness be? What kind of bituminous mixture should we spec here? Those are things that engineers are really good at.
Yeah, I love the analogy you drew in the book of going, if traffic engineers were intellectually honest throughout their life, they would live in a house that was nothing but hallways. So
Right.
that was kind of the perfect note of that. Jess?
Oh, I was gonna say you're talking about engineers are not qualified to, kind of deal with some of these things. And I'm wondering, what do you think? Should they be? Should there be, because you say no right away, but here's what I'm thinking about. I had this professor, Citadel, educated civil engineer, right? And he was talking to him about, at the time I was in the middle of environmental engineering 101. And I said, we have to look at all these different things when we construct the built environment. And he was like, you kids today, you've got all of these different rules and regulations and stuff. He said, in my day, and I thought this was really powerful. He said, in my day, that was called being a good engineer, was considering all of these things. And so I wonder, as an engineer, it's not like an engineer couldn't figure out how to think about some of these things. And I think that you, as an engineer, you're coming up with this idea. We've got to think about other things. And I understand what you're saying. We need to bring folks who are experts to the table at that. And sometimes that's the people that live on the street, but being even aware that that's what we need to look for. I mean, is that not just good engineering?
So let me push back gently on this, because I see where you're going. I understand. And there's a part of me that is empathetic to that. I'm going to give you an analogy with the medical profession, because the medical profession has struggled with this too. There's a recognition that doctors with good bedside manner actually get better outcomes because the patients are more participating in their own healing than doctors with bad bedside manner. And so they actually teach doctors now today how to be more human, right? But if you or I has a traumatic injury, if we have brain cancer, if we have to get open heart surgery, I don't care if my doctor has good bedside manner. I want the best doctor, right? So when I look at engineering, there's many different aspects of it. And if you're someone, and we all know, I'm sure, engineers who like to sit in an office and do calculations, and they size bridges, and they look at, the size of a pipe to handle this amount of stormwater. I love those guys. They're great. They're fun to hang around with. They should never be in a public meeting. They should never be making public decisions. They should never be part of but we need those people. They're great engineers, right? They do important work. If you're going to be the doctor who's going to be the frontline person meeting with patients, I don't expect you to know every single thing about how to do heart surgery, right? We got a specialist for that. If you're the kind of engineer that are going to be out in front of the public and having be part of that dialogue and that interface, let's train you on that. Let's focus on that. But I don't even know if that needs to be an engineer. I mean, I actually, in my planning world, found that planners were way better at doing that kind of work than engineers generally were.
Okay.
Engineering is a deeply technical field. And I think that it's fine to have deeply technical people doing it. I almost think it's unreasonable to expect them to be, dynamic public speakers who can grasp. I mean, look, there's the old joke about engineers. How do you know an engineer likes you? If they look at your shoes when they're talking instead of their own shoes, right? That's funny because it's real, right? But that's not a knock on engineers. It's just that we've asked them to do something they're not good at, which is, plan dynamic systems. They're really good at solving specific problems.
I keep, a minute ago, you painted a picture in my head. I'm just this hypothetical discussion between an architect and the structural engineer. And I see these two people staring at the Eiffel Tower, right? And one just going, ooh, it's beautiful. Look at the angles, the massing, and the other one just going, well, it ain't waterproof, right?
Or not very efficient, right?
Thing sways in the wind, man, like something, I don't know. But and to your point, I've often thought the same thing, that engineers definitely need to be good at the technical things, and the planners maybe need to be really good at the humane things. That doesn't mean that either can't be good at both or the other thing, but it's sort of like a team, right? As cliche as that might sound, a receiver's job is to run fast and get open, right? An offensive lineman's job is to block and do it very, very well. And so I guess on that sort of thinking about that way, so where do planners come in to the notion of street and strong town concepts, and how do they counteract people like, well, maybe the non-recovering engineers that are yet to have their epiphany?
Let me introduce a job that has disappeared that I have seen in a few places, but I think is kind of bridge this gap, because I'm not keen on the planning profession today at large either. I think a lot of them can be reduced to just zoning officials, right? And zoning officials are almost worthless in our, they like
but they have their AICP, Chuck. I mean, they're
certified. Oh my gosh.
They're doing something.
I mean, just horrible.
You're our fourth commissioner. You don't even know it.
Well, no, I say seriously, go on that track, because I think you're getting at the same technocrat applying technical things, and that doesn't encompass the field or what the field should be.
So zoning, again, go back to the end of World War II, and zoning was developed before World War II as a kind of a defensive thing, but it turned into an offensive tool to be able to replicate things very quickly, again, to keep out of the Great Depression. How do we get the economy going? We've got to be able to replicate this development pattern over and over and over again across an entire continent. Zoning is really good at that because it sets minimum standards and you can just repeat. prior to the Great Depression and going back throughout all of human history, really, when civilizations got together, they would have something that we would recognize here in America today as a town architect. Someone whose job was to know a little bit about engineering, a little bit about planning, a little bit about human experience, a little bit about business development. And the way that you would kind of assess and judge them is how great of a place have they built? How much wealth and value is created here by the way you lay out the park and the way you lay that out in relation to the public buildings and the way you lay that out in relation to the private investment that comes in. And their job was, in a sense, kind of balancing all these things. And an engineer would work for them because sometimes you need a technical person to do something. And a planner would sometimes work for them because sometimes you need someone from a process standpoint. But the vision, and I think you can think of like Daniel Burnham, or LaFont in Washington, D.C. When we go to planning school, we memorialize these people. We say, well, Daniel Burnham, make no little plans, the Great Chicago Plan after the fire. This is what planners are designed to do. But none of us do that. We all get out and implement zoning codes and do little neighborhood area plans that stifle innovation and change and evolution of a neighborhood. I think that, think of this in terms of like a town architect, someone was in a sense technically astute, but not grounded and based in technical work, would be like the ideal kind of professional to kind of lead cities through this.
So let's take that a second and kind of make the technical relatable. You're the town architect for Springfield, which is a big storyline in your book.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about the library and stuff. So how would the town architect approach the 85th percentile and wanting it to be applied to a street across from a library and all the scenarios there? Explain that to the non-technical lay person so they might understand how the 85th percentile has impacted their life, their neighborhood, their town through the lens of this town architect.
I love this question. How much can I assume about your audience that they understand the 85th percentile?
Give the 2-sentence version.
Okay. So the idea of the 85th percentile rule is that drivers are going to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving. And so if we're going to set a speed limit, what we want is we want to go out and measure the speed people are driving. And we want to set the speed limit at the speed that most people are driving at or below. That is the 85th percentile speed. 85% of people are driving at that speed or below. And what you're trying to do is have traffic that flows. If you have a speed limit set too low and most people are driving faster than that, you're going to have people running into each other. If you have the speed limit set too high and people are naturally driving slower, you're going to have people running into each other. So the goal is to have the speed limit and the speed people feel comfortable driving at similar ranges. If you were a town architect and you were looking at this, you would not be, first of all, obsessed with mobility. You would not be obsessed with traffic flow. That would be one consideration among many that you were trying to harmonize in a place. If you were in particular in downtown Springfield, near the Springfield Library, where I center a lot of the book, the concerns there would be about safety of people crossing the street on foot. You have a lot of people doing that, people on bikes. You would be really, really interested in the return on investment. So how do we get more private sector business investment here? We've placed this massive public library there. How do we actually have that value reflected in the surrounding neighborhoods? And so you would be de-emphasizing through traffic. In that sense, the 85th percentile does something really powerful for you because you can look and say, I recognize that high-speed travel here is dangerous and destructive to the environment I'm trying to create. I need speeds to be 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour through this stretch. And if I go out and I measure speeds and I see that 85% of people are driving at 30 or 40 miles an hour, the recognition that I have is that I've designed my street wrong. I actually have the dimensions of my street, the cross section, the sides of it, the edge friction, everything that I've designed is communicating to drivers, you can drive faster than what I really want to have happening in this space. So I need to fix my street design. I need to tighten things up. I need to communicate to drivers that, hey, a safe experience for you, a positive experience for you is going to be at a much slower speed.
All right. So I I want to ask you a question. If you could go back with Marty McFly in 1955 and change the industry of traffic engineering, what tweaks would you make?
For some reason, Johnny Be Good came into my mind.
Perfect. He definitely
maybe
wrote that song.
Maybe I would not steal that song from Chuck Berry. I would. I'm a drummer, so
Perfect.
I would probably, I would bet on football games too. I think I would.
I think this is.
I'm just going to
perfect.
admit
honest.
that I would do.
That's
That would be
honest.
fun. That would be fun, wouldn't it? I mean, I would.
You could
Why not?
bankrupt Vegas before it even gets going.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's
Don't
what
ruin Vegas
I'd
for
kill
me.
it in its infancy, right?
Yes. Not a
no,
bad thing.
I feel like the year I would want to go back with Marty McFly and become like the dictator of the transportation profession would be at the end of the 1960s. Because at the end of the 1960s, we had done what we set out to do. We set out to create the interstate system, which I'm going to say, the interstate system in the US is an amazing system, particularly if you took a snapshot at the end of the 1960s. We had connected an entire continent in a way that had never been envisioned. I would have preferred it not to go through cities. I think that was a major, major mistake. If I could have, gone back to the 50s, that would be the thing I would correct. But to me, the huge mistake we made was not having that cathartic moment like they did throughout much of Europe, where they got to a point where they said, okay, we built these highways out, we're building them now in cities, and the city part does not seem to be working. The interstate part, sure, like connecting Omaha with Kansas City, great idea, good for everybody. But running a highway through the middle of Omaha and destroying all the neighborhoods, that seems to be a bad idea. Let's stop doing that. Mm-hmm. And if you go to Europe, you see that they actually had this moment where they wrestled with this. Like, we have no body of knowledge. Because remember, all this was like new things we created on the fly. In the US, we just took like the stuff we figured out in the 50s and 60s, and we said, you know what, this worked really great on the highways. Let's put this in the middle of our cities too. And in Europe, they're like, you know what? That's like a different body of knowledge. That's like a different profession almost. Let's make something different called street design and make that different from road design. And let's have like two different approaches. In the US, we said, no, it's just all one thing. That's, to me, the moment. And you can see it in the literature. This is Jane Jacobs rising up, right? And Mumford and the people around them saying, like, this doesn't work in cities, stop doing this. And we basically threw tons of money at the engineers and said, go plow over them. And sure, we'll do NEPA and we'll do stuff to slow down the process and give people a chance to comment, but we're still going to do it. Here's all the money, go do it. And that's, to me, the moment we really sold our soul as a profession and as a country.
So I'm a idiot on metaphors. They always just pop into my head. And what you're describing to me, I liken to, in this country, a buffet, right? What I mean by that is I challenge anybody when they go to a buffet to limit themselves to one plate. Nobody ever does that, right? They just keep saying they go back and they go back and they go back. And it prompts this behavior because it's out there. And it's like, of course, it's so enticing in so many ways. And I think our streets in many cases kind of do a similar thing. Of course, like you're described in the book, going too fast. Well, that design, I hate to say it this way, but design kind of made me do that because I don't even realize the speed that I'm going because of the cues, the lack of cues, that is there. So
can I say something on that?
Yeah, please.
I was trying to explain this to someone the other day who was very upset with me because they said it's speeding that causes crashes. It's speeding, don't you acknowledge that speeding is the problem? And my response ultimately was, speeding does not correlate with crashes. In other words, 99% of driving trips involve speeding. Like, everybody's speeding all the time. If you said, what we see is that when people speed, they get in crashes, it's not true. Mm-hmm. People speed all the time and don't get in crashes. There's other things that actually intervene in the speeding to create a crash. It's the randomness, the complexity, what have you. And so, yeah, I feel like what we have done is we've successfully had our brains diverted to away from the engineering profession and the way that streets are designed. And we've hyper focused on the outcomes and the adverse outcomes. And then we back up and say, almost from an insurance standpoint, what driver can we blame? What mistake that a driver made can we blame for this? And I think it's, I feel like it's an immoral system we've set up, where you essentially randomly are going to be labeled a reckless malcontent, person who's done something horrible through almost certainly, no discerning fault of your own.
I love that you had a section in the book about National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and during COVID and explain that. And instead of having the moment to look at ourselves and understand it, they just start finger wagging, right? And I think it was an interview you did in Texas, where they tried to pin back, well, isn't it just human error? And you fall back on that from that same thing. So you have a statement in here that I think is more profound, and it probably should be like the opening statement of every regional transportation plan. If traffic engineers started from scratch with just one goal, to create the maximum amount of traffic congestion possible, they would end up creating the transportation system we now use. I think that is, I need to sit and think about that for a good week, even though that's a life I've lived. Tell us more before we move into the lightning round about that quote.
Well, you create the metaphor I use in the book is a river system, right? And a watershed. And we understand that the way you get a flood is to accumulate little bits of water over a broad watershed. If you wanted to create a huge flood, you would just pour water into the system all the way around, right? Like you would cut down the trees and you would just increase the amount of runoff running into that river system. You wouldn't get a flood everywhere. You'd get a flood where everything came together. And that is essentially traffic congestion. I mean, that's the dynamics of the system we created. It literally, and you say profound, I think it's profoundly sad, how engineers can take a class in hydrology and recognize how a hydrologic system works, and then seemingly like walk down the hall to a traffic class and look at the same system dynamics and not reach the same conclusion. I mean, in one, the idea is let's hold this water back so we don't get a flood. And the other one is let's just make the river really, really wide. And, I feel like it's a prime example of the myopia of the profession blinding them to the reality, because as soon as you say it, like the maximum amount of congestion possible, it's obvious to everybody, right? It's like you can't unsee that at that point. Yet I'll acknowledge when I had that realization, I walked around in a stupor for about 3 weeks too, going just what? We're so blinded to it because it literally is the water we swim in, right? It's hard to recognize it.
Well, and it sounds like maybe you're talking about engineers having a Moses complex of being able to part those rivers and the powers that they yield, right? So Chuck, I want to ask you one more question before we get into the fun lightning round, but this is a little kind of a serious one, in that your book is riddled with, to me, just to borrow a Seinfeldism, gold, Jerry, gold. So many statements and comments. I'm going, oh my gosh, yes. But I know it's gotten you in a little bit of hot water, right? And so I want to explore that. There's one of the things in here that you talk about, with regard to projecting traffic and traffic models, and how much time and energy and money is spent on these. And one of your responses was, cities and states spend enormous sums of money doing this work, i.e. modeling, yet a competent third grader with a straight edge could predict just as well. I mean, right? But here's where I'm going with it. I think all of us on this commission are, when we do our jobs, we take telling the truth very seriously, for better or worse. And sometimes it's gotten us in trouble because not everybody wants to hear that, right? They just want to hear everything's great, everything's going to be great. You are a truth teller, but I want the audience to know at what cost.
Well, I have an engineering license, and that has, for better or for worse, made me subject to the state licensing board. The state licensing board has a process, in a sense, to monitor the work of engineers and ensure that the public is protected against bad engineering. There's a complaint process that's in place for the members of the public, members of the profession, to hold each other accountable to this. I've seen this used many times. Engineers, people who are not licensed, who are out doing work that requires a license, who are unqualified to do the work, people who do work that is really shoddy, people within the profession who use their position for their own financial gain, exploiting others. I've seen these things happen. I have had the complaint process now turned against me on a couple of occasions. The latest one being I had a lapse in my licensure. My license expired. I didn't renew right away. I don't practice engineering, so I don't sign any plans. I don't do any work regulated by the state. When I discovered my license was lapsed, because I'm fully qualified, I reapplied and I was given my license. During that intervening period of time, though, my bio on my website said that I'm a professional engineer. And there was a complaint made against me. The state investigated. The state found that I did no work, but that I lied to the public by claiming to be a licensed engineer when I wasn't, that I misrepresented myself to the public, that I committed fraud in doing this because it was an intentional act. And they actually find, after a couple of years, because I fought back, my organization Strong Towns fought back against this. After a couple of years of litigation, the board ruled all of these things and fined me $1,500, censured me and reprimanded me. So I have a official censure from the state of Minnesota. We're appealing this. There's a court of appeals process, and this will be overturned at some point. But at huge cost of time and resources and attorney's fees. I think the sad thing is that, the board has just last year had an engineer who practiced for a decade, signing plans, overseeing others, the work of others, doing actual real engineering work. That person was also fined, but was not censured. That person was fined, but not reprimanded. This is a shot on me, and I think we can focus on that. And certainly it's not been fun. But I think more than anything else, it's a warning shot to other engineers.
Yeah.
If you want to practice engineering and make your living doing that, you better shut your mouth and stay in line, because if you make yourself a target, other professionals are going to attack you through this process. And the board, licensing board, is inclined to go along with them, even when it's a baseless attack.
And the piece I get with that is like, we lead developed nations in traffic deaths. Where's the censuring, the fines, and removal of licensure from that?
You know the answer to that, Don. And here's the answer. And let me say it very clearly. Today, civil engineers are often, especially traffic engineers, are very, very sensitive to liability and liability issues, primarily for themselves and their own practice, but also on behalf of their clients, the cities they serve, and the people they work with. They're very concerned with liability. And they're so concerned that they will build something that they know is unsafe if it follows standard orthodoxy practice and can be defended in court. They would rather do that than build something that is safer, yet requires them to vary outside of the established protection that the rules and the standards give them. Again, I find that disgusting. I find that immoral. And I'm willing to stand up and say that. I think that more engineers need to have the freedom to be able to say that likewise, because I can't tell you how many have said to me, I agree with you, but I can't say it.
Yeah. So that was all pretty heavy, Jess.
I was gonna say this is sobering, and and so many things I'm thinking. I'm gonna go think too for a week. But how about some things about you, Chuck? I want to know who's your favorite Minnesota musician?
Oh my gosh.
There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm from Minnesota. It's got to be Prince, right? I mean, how could it not be Prince?
Perfect. So, I mean, did Prince's little red convertible actually lead to speed limit increases on the Minnesota highways?
I don't think so. Prince was such an interesting dude. I think, you know, he was a very urban Twin Cities guy. I'm wearing my Minnesota Timberwolves jersey, and he was a sweatshirt, and he was a huge Timberwolves fan. He would show up at the games.
Yeah.
It's funny because, you know, obviously you miss someone more when they're gone. You recognize their greatness even more, but he was one who I think I recognized, and obviously scores of other people recognized his just genius.
Yeah. I mean, I saw him one time, and Shaka Khan opened for him, and it was the best. And I got to tell you how cool this guy was. The show didn't sell out. It was one of these big like arena things. And so what he did is all of us college kids that had bought nosebleed seats, he moved us all down into the better seat. I was like, I'm going to this concert forever. This is amazing. So
definitely a bucket list concert that I'm sad I missed that experience while he was alive.
He would show up to places in Minnesota kind of unannounced. I mean, this was like things that you would hear about, because like when I was in college, I'd be like, hey, Prince was here tonight, and he would just play for hours. And I mean, like, just
hanging out.
The guy could just make beautiful music without even exerting any effort, and it was a huge gift. Yeah.
Chuck, favorite Minnesota-based food item that maybe people were surprised by?
Well, we're very proud here of our Juicy Lucy, which is the hamburger with butter in it. Yeah. And I gotta say that I really like Juicy Lucy's. If you're coming to Minnesota, though, I think Wisconsin would claim the cheese curds, but that would have to be my favorite. And I would say in Minnesota, I know where all the good cheese curds are within half an hour of my place. So
nice.
If you were going to create a reality show on Netflix about traffic engineers, what would the title be, and what kind of shoes would they be looking at?
Wow. Yeah. What would the title be? This is the kind of thing that we talk about as a team, because we do a lot of communication stuff. So it's about getting like the messaging and the branding right. There's a part of me that's like, Big Brother just came to mind. I know there's one called that, but to me, it would be like, Little Brother, and you would show him getting like beat up in school, and then taking it out on people like a Napoleon complex, right?
Oh my gosh.
So are you going to use your Minnesota engineering license to light a campfire or a cigar?
Well, I'm actually retired now. So they have a special status here in Minnesota called retirement status, where you actually get to keep your PE, keep your license, keep everything, but you don't have to pay to renew. And because you can't do any work, but I'm like, fine, I'm not doing any work anyway. And they can't really touch me anymore.
So wait, you're retired, but they're still wanting to censure and fine you. So on one side, they're saying, it's kind of worthless anyway, keep it. On the other side, it's how dare you?
Well, they censured me for a lapse that happened like 3 years ago. Right. So
technically,
we're way beyond. Yeah, no, it's.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So Chuck, I got an idea for you as we get close to wrap, but your next book, I really think you should take that censure letter and make that the binding of the book. That's what the front of it says. And it's basically how an engineer telling the truth got in trouble, or how the truth gets you in trouble, something along those lines. And, anyway, Chuck, we can't thank you enough. We know you got to go. We appreciate your time. It's valuable. And for everybody at home listening, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, I've got a testament to the page construction, because so many of them are dog-eared. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I'm doing it anyway. So thank you for your time. We appreciate it so very much. And I have a feeling maybe at some point you'll be back on. But again, appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you so much. I'd love to come back. You guys are a lot of fun. And I know we have way more we can talk about. So
yes,
you take care.
Certainly do. All right. Commissioners, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Have a good day, y'all. See you later.